Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 2023 Good, Bad, and Ugly webinar for payments in Latin America. My name is Andreas Farge, and I'm a senior analyst at PCMI. I'll be our moderator today. Thank you all for joining. The Good, Bad, and Ugly is an article series that we come out with every year and is routinely our most popular piece of content in which we track forecasted scenarios of what could happen in the upcoming year, considering what could go well, what could go wrong, and potential worst case scenarios. You may have caught our webinar yesterday from John Price, Managing Director of AMI, covering the macro analysis of the region. Today, I'm so excited to be deep diving into payments. So thank you again for joining. Like all of our PCMI webinars, you're not only welcome to, but you're encouraged to ask questions. We'll be taking a Q&A session at the end. So please find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and feel free to ask questions directly there. So before we begin, I must take a moment to show you our standard legal notice. Please be advised that all the content here today is reflects the opinion of our panelists and do not solely take this information to make any specific business decisions. I also want to take a moment to remind or introduce our audience to the Payments and Commerce Market Intelligence brand. As many of you know, since December 2022, we officially launched the PCMI brand, representing the expansion of the evolution of our coverage from just not only Latin America, but global. Of course, the payments industry is trans-global, and after receiving demand from our clients, we've officially launched this international presence. We are still affiliated with AMI, and our mission statement continues to be more committed. To be more committed than any other consultancy on earth to the success of our clients. On earth just for now. And just to give you a glimpse of where we're operating, you can see our teams are established in 5 major cities, which can now cover more than 50 global markets. Exciting times. Today's session is going to be covering our bread and butter, Latin America. Let's go ahead and meet our speakers. Today's panelists include Lindsay, Lehr, Managing Director of PCMI. Many of you know her well, and I'm happy to also introduce Sulivan Rocha, our PIX expert calling in from Brazil. So I would love for you guys to introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Andreas, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Lindsay, Lehr here. It's great to see many familiar friends and colleagues on the line, and we're looking forward to having a great discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. Hey, everyone. I'm Sulivan. I'm an analyst focused on the payments market. And as a Brazilian, it's a pleasure to be here to discuss the scenario in the region. So thanks for the invitation, Andreas.
Awesome. Well, welcome to you both. And again, my name is Andreas Farge. I know many of you from previous engagements we've had together, as well as the PCMI Coffee Chat series. And I'm thrilled to be moderating today's session. So let's go ahead and dive in. Lindsay, so this series is based off this really cool article that you wrote and published. And you mentioned the following. 2023 is potentially the most difficult one on record for companies in the payments industry to make projections and anticipate risk. Can you explain why this is the case?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Andreas. And great question to open up the discussion. You know, we produce this article every year. Maybe you've seen the article through our email marketing on our blog. We're going to post the link in the chat for you to access the article if you want to read more in depth. But basically, you know, we kind of project what are the good, the bad, and the ugly scenarios possible for the year. And I think this article is especially pertinent this year because honestly, the industry could go any which way. You know, why has it never been more difficult to connect the dots? This was a chuckle. A client said this to me lately. It's never been more difficult to make certain projections, because we have never, and this will probably only continue to get more like this every year, but we've never had more opportunity, more options, and at the same time, more risk and complication. When I got started in this industry about 10 years ago, payments was very simple. It was cards and cash. And all the client engagements we did were around improving a credit card value proposition. Okay. Then around 2015, e-commerce started to pick up, and now you had a new channel to start to analyze. Then we started to see neobanks and P2P payments come on the map. 2017 was when that started to really kind of accelerate. And then from there, honestly, it's just been this extremely steep curve where now, we have non-card digital payments representing 20% of all retail payments in the region, which include QR codes, RTP, even buy now, pay later, even crypto. So we have new payment methods, new form factors, new payment rails, new currencies, including foreign exchange and cryptocurrency, stablecoin, now soon coming on the scene, central bank digital currencies, new payment rails, new payment methods from Visa and MasterCard, and then add to that a global pandemic, which accelerated digitization like never before, a war in Ukraine, creating all kinds of uncertainty, high interest rates and high inflation, combined with drying up of venture capital, making it harder for fintechs to operate, is just the perfect storm for total and utter chaos and uncertainty. So that's a little bit the fun of this webinar today, is to hash out, some of these things that could happen in the region. And so that's just, kind of an opening statement of why this is specifically relevant for us today in 2023.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. And Sulivan, I'd like to turn the attention to you, since Brazil has really been the star, the protagonist of the changes taking place in Latin America today with PIX, Open Finance, and even CBDCs, as Lindsay mentioned. We'll go into more detail later on in the conversation, but very quickly, as a PCMI leader and a Brazilian in Brazil, what's your overall prediction for payments in 2023? Good, bad, ugly? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. I believe it is extremely good, especially from the consumer's perspective. PIX has been a super important evolution. It's now widespread and with more and more new use cases and solutions every day, and a lot of new players developing new solutions to use and enhance PIX. And as you said, Open Finance will also bring new enablers, new use cases, more innovation to the market. So I believe that this year it has everything to be a very good year on the Brazilian market. And in the next years, we will see a lot of new evolutions and continue to develop this trend.
Awesome. Great. So before we dive into any more detail, we'd like to ask you all a poll question. So for your specific businesses, what do you expect 2023 to be like? You can interpret this any way you want. We like to think of it in terms of growth and revenue potential. So will it be good, okay, bad, ugly? And considering bad is a negative year, whereas ugly is the worst case scenario. Giving you guys a little bit more time here. We're excited to see the results. Awesome. So let's go ahead and close up that poll and show everyone. Great. So, okay, very much skewed to either good or okay, which is a great way to start this webinar. So some positive thoughts here. And with that, let's go ahead and start with the good. So we'll go into a little bit, we'll go into this detail here. So yeah, starting with the good, explosions. Certainly a lot to discuss. So Lindsay, in the article you mentioned specifically that the biggest winners this year will be merchants. How are merchants, both large and small across the region, accessing low-cost payment acceptance? aka increasing acceptance.
Perfect. Yeah. So I I really like what you said, Sulivan, that the good is really, Brazil, it's exciting in Brazil. All of these developments being really positive, especially for consumers, right, who now have access to easier payments, right, which is what the industry is really about delivering on. And I would change that statement to say end users, because merchants are really, really benefiting from these changes with, for the first time, merchants in many countries, definitely Brazil and many other countries, can access what we're calling a low-cost payment method for the first time, low cost being around a 1% commission. For years, for decades, merchants have had two options: cash, which is free, but comes with a lot of inefficiencies and cash management costs, or a credit or debit card, which, those of course have ranging fees depending on many factors, but have been considered high. And we know that, merchants constantly complain about the cost of acceptance. And, when we look at, especially small businesses, if you're a mega merchant, a grande superficie or a big box store, you have the ability to negotiate a little bit, but small businesses really suffer, having to pay very often more than 5% to accept cards. And so this is really the first time that we've seen the ability for merchants to have a second option when it comes to digital payments. And the demand for this has 100% been validated and proven by the adoption level of Pix, right? We have over, there's studies out there that say over 70% of e-commerce merchants are accepting Pix. And e-commerce, of course, is where Pix has had the most impact because cash is not as easy of an option. And debit cards are very limited for their use, their acceptance and authorization levels in e-commerce in Brazil. So, and we've seen this, merchants are so attracted to Pix that we see even big companies offering 5, 7, 10% discount on if the customer chooses to pay with Pix. So we're seeing a lot of appetite and a lot of demand from merchants who are ending up right now really winning from this evolution.
Okay, so 10%, wow, that's very aggressive, or 7 still. It's clearly aggressive. Sulivan, how is this possible? Why is this the case? Card fees are not that expensive to justify a 10% cost discount. So why are merchants willing to accept this method? What are other benefits that Pix brings to the table?
Sure. This is a great question. I'm glad that you brought this up. I have been asked this several times. So this question has two super important points to take in consideration. The first is the fee that will be paid, of course, and the second is when the money will be available to the merchant. So the time frame. And specifically about the fee, or the first point, of course, we don't have as high commission rates as 10%, of course, ranging between 2%, 5%, depending on the player, of course, and also the volume, as Lindsay said. But we have to remember that this is the rate for the credit card purchases paid in full. And of course, that installments play a big role in Brazil. And it is very common to see, to be able to pay for purchases up to 12 installments, especially in these retailers where we can see impressive discounts such as 10%. And when we look at the cost of anticipation, so that is, instead of receiving the money at the end of the month or the next month, receiving it now, or at the end of the receiving it now or at the end of the current month, it is not uncommon that these fees exceeds 20%. And the second point is about the time frame. So not only the fees, but the fees that we see between 2 and 5% are usually to the merchant receive the amount after 30 days, so after the next month. And if the merchant wants or needs to receive it now, the fees are higher. So of course, all the rates I'm talking about may vary from player to player, but in general, that's the idea. And Pix solves these two problems, the fees and the time frame. First, the fees are much lower, so it's better, it's easier to accept, and it's also cheaper. And second, the time frame, because it is real-time payment, so it allows the merchant to have a much healthier cash flow.
I love that cash flow and accepting and making money, which is what business is all about. Very, very cool.
And just to jump in, one other thought I just, had as you were talking, Sulivan, we often talk about how when you introduce a new technology, the experience has to be 10 times better than what someone is used to in order to influence or impact a behavior change. And we know that even though Pix has been really widely adopted, the experience of purchasing is a little bit clunky, right? The famous copy paste, you get redirected to your bank. And so, it's just support in that narrative, this 10% discount, support of that narrative. If you want someone to change behavior, you have to make it 5-10 times better than what they're used to get them to get out of their habits. So just an additional thought I had there.
And kind of going off that, it's interesting, like merchants are like, yeah, no, this 10% discount merchants are accepting because of all the other benefits they receive. Awesome. So Lindsay, just diving in a little deeper beyond Brazil. So on this slide, we see a bunch of other different schemes, but no countries as mature as Brazil. Still, can you tell us what's going on in these other markets? What are the trends? What's happening?
Yes. So undeniably, real-time, low-cost money transfers is a global trend. It's happening all over the world. It's happening. We've seen UPI in India. We see now FedNow starting, being launched in the US in July. Europe is quite advanced in this, and so it's now arriving in other countries in Latin America. And Andreas, you mentioned no one is anywhere near as mature as Brazil. The central bank really did a masterful job in designing and rolling out Pix, which has been successful to varying degrees in Latin America, with Costa Rica being the most mature after Brazil, with Simpe Móvil, which has been around for longer actually, and has particular tax benefits, again, supported by the government. After that, we have a real mixed bag. You have P2P apps, right? Like Yape, Plin, Yapi, Neki, which have really scaled in a P2P sense and are starting to be used for purchases, but mostly for very long tail use cases. It hasn't tracked or scaled to the level of Pix. The two that are potentially most interesting to observe are PCMI in Colombia, right? An e-commerce button that now enables you to pay online with your bank account, and also SPAY in Mexico, real-time bank account transfers that just have not made the leap into a good user experience for purchasing, but SPAY low value transactions under $400 are increasing year over year. And so that is a telltale sign that SPAY is starting to be used as a more daily payment method, not only for huge transfers between financial institutions or large transfers, but actual more recurring day-to-day purchases. So it's definitely something for us to be watching.
Awesome. That's very reminiscent. I was there 6 weeks ago and I could hear informal merchants just raving on about SPAY, which is definitely a change. Alrighty, so continuing on here. Lindsay, in the article here, you speak about this new paradigm, this changing paradigm. I'd like for you to expand on this. To quote you, demand for real-time money movement is inspiring innovation from all kinds of players. Truly, a new paradigm is being developed. So based on this quote from the article, can you elaborate on this, please?
Yes. And this is part of the reason why I say that there's never been more opportunity and more options, more directions for companies to go in, and why it's also confusing. Because when payments are slow, there's not as much opportunity for other types of companies to get involved and provide value-added services. There's not as much volume of commerce taking place when payments are slow. There's fewer use cases, there's fewer payment methods, there are fewer participants in the ecosystem. But when you have instant payment that is also free or low cost, you now have, of course, I mean, supply and demand. Cost goes down, the user experience gets better. Now you have more demand from consumers, from corporates, from small merchants, for all different kinds of use cases. And so that creates that increase in demand, creates the increase in opportunity for other types of solutions. So now with everything taking place in a digital environment on these new payment rails, there's all of these things that haven't yet been solved for. Okay, cross-border payments being one. The need for security, having more and more, there's all of this discussion around with when you have a new payments ecosystem, you attract naive users who are inexperienced. You also attract very sophisticated fraudsters. So you're having the need for increased and enhanced security solutions. EKYC to help comply with regulation, both national and international, now that we're talking about cross-border payments. And so there's this new, when I say new paradigm, I mean a new set of players offering new services. And I want to speak about two kind of use cases in particular. When we're talking about instant money movement, that I think everyone here knows, if you reflect upon it, the instant a consumer becomes exposed to a better user experience, that becomes the standard. It happens almost instantaneously. There's a wonderful phrase that people spoil very quickly. So you become used to a new user experience. Anything inferior to that is substandard. And so that requires everyone to step up to the plate to meet this new user experience. And so now I have the expectation for my money to move fast, no matter what environment I'm in. And that is that latter part of, no matter what environment I'm in, is starting to be enabled via payment initiation and request to pay services. So in Brazil, PIX, payment initiation service, I can receive a license from the central bank in which I, as a platform, can initiate a PIX transaction from a different financial account on my platform. That means me as a user, I can now, let's say I'm on a social media platform or a neobank platform, but I want to access my funds in a different bank account. I can initiate that transaction from an external environment. And that is really tantamount to completely interoperability and trans-platform transactionality. And so this is very new. Not too many consumers have had this experience yet, but there's about 20 or so companies licensed in Brazil to take on this role as payment initiator. And that starts to become the standard. Consumers will no longer have any tolerance for having to exit their environment, go into another environment, log in, go through an authorization, authorize the payment, go back to their environment. So this is going to create a standard of a new definition of interoperability, not just of the payment, but across different types of platforms and players, which opens the opportunity for banking as a service, right? Enabling non-financial companies to offer financial services, embedded payments and all kinds, and embedded finance and all different types of new non-traditional environments. So the next 24 months, I would say are really going to be around enabling commerce across platforms and enabling commerce in unexpected places.
Awesome. Well, that quote you mentioned about being spoiled resonates with me really well. Looks like I'm going to Brazil soon. And speaking of Brazil, Sulivan, let's dive into Brazil. So what can you speak about this new paradigm there?
Yeah, I think first of all, the Central Bank of Brazil has extremely forward-looking agenda. They published recently the most up-to-date version. And last month, the president of the central bank made a comment in an interview that he would like to connect the three big blocks of the digital world that exists right now in Brazil. So PIX, open finance, and the digital currency. So Pix. Pix has already proven to be a huge success, and now the next steps. There are a lot of next steps, but the development of recurring Pix, credit solutions tied to Pix, the maturing of the payment initiation services, as Lindsay mentioned, buy now pay later solutions using Pix, and also the improvements of the anti-fraud tools. And in addition to that, there have also been several conversations with other countries to export Pix as a international payment system, and perhaps future integration of domestic instant payment systems, allowing some type of cross-border. This is not clear yet, but there are plans. And open finance that will promote competition and also efficiency in the industry. In Brazil, there are already 15 million clients allowing the open finance, and around 800 participant institutions. So this is relevant, of course, but still has room to grow. And the central bank digital currency, which is not exactly a CBDC as in other countries, but in any case, it is still a digital currency that could reduce costs of distribution, settlements, transactions. So we will certainly see a lot of progress in the next few years, I guess.
Awesome. I think progress is a great way to end the good section. And moving on to the next section, which is the bad. And before we go into this, I'd like to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send us questions, which we'll be addressing at the end of this presentation. So yes, the bad. Here, as we see on the slide, the very significant downside of the story is downward pressures on margins, primarily impacting issuers, acquirers, and card networks who are experiencing this new competition from RTPs. Lindsay, is this really materializing? Is it happening? Are we seeing these results show up in the card networks and acquirers' financial results? What's going on there?
Great question. And the answer is no. Very amazingly, the answer is no. And I think that I'll get into why that is in a second. But I just wanted to mention that by putting this downward, when we say downward pressure on margins, what we really mean is downward pressure on merchant acceptance, right? This 1% fee that merchants are experiencing with Pix acceptance, going down to 0 when we look at other schemes in other markets. So card networks, issuers, and acquirers have never before faced this level of competition, specifically for debit cards. And so the question is, so how are they responding? And your question is very valid, Andreas. How is this showing up in their financial results? And now, Visa and MasterCard, of course, they report on their global results, not specifically Latin America, but this is a trend happening all across the world, right? And when we look at their results, both of them reported growth of more than 20% in 2022, and continue quarter after quarter having really positive results. So how is this possible? And it's really interesting to look at the makeup of their growth. We call this the bad, but of course, competition can be very positive because what the card networks are doing are responding in really exciting ways. New flows make up a big part of their growth, meaning Visa Direct and MasterCard Send, right? Their response to RTPs using their own technology. They're also growing around 50% when we look at cross-border transactions. So they still maintain a very strong competitive advantage in cross-border, and our world and commerce is becoming increasingly internationalized and connected, which is great for them. And then we also see, services. They've gone through a series of, both companies have gone through a series of acquisitions, expanding and diversifying their portfolio of services. from fraud solutions to open banking solutions, really becoming a much more much more than a payment rail. And that's what they have to their advantage. And when we look, the same goes for when we look at acquirers like Cielo, like Stone, specifically in Brazil, who are being directly impacted by PIX, and they're also seeing really impressive results as they are evolving into value-added services to respond to this competitive threat.
Awesome. Well, zooming into like debit cards, which I understand is the most that has the strongest threat from these RTPs. How can they revamp? What value-added services or solutions can they provide that other payment methods cannot? What's the edge?
That's a great question. And debit really is a existential crisis for debit, because debit essentially is deposit access, right? I can access my funds in my bank account and move them to where I want to move them. And so, debit definitely needs some revamping, but that requires financing. And a lot of fees are regulated. Fees on debit cards tend to be capped and regulated in a lot of markets around the region, which makes it difficult for card networks to operate. And making them need to subsidize from other areas of the business. And we're starting to see them respond in this way. But I mean, with all of the resources that debit card networks and issuers have, it's kind of fun to think about what could be the next evolution of a debit card. We've already started to see credit being offered over debit card through partnerships with buy now, pay later companies. Of course, cross-border remains a very strong niche where it can excel, especially because only 20 to 40% of Latin Americans, depending on the market, have access to a credit card, which is the primary payment method for cross-border transactions. And then thinking about, what does a debit card do? It accesses your bank account. And I think one area of opportunity I see is that your bank statement and your transactional history is a record of your life. It's a record of all the financial decisions you as an individual make for yourself and for your family or for your business. And that has so much intelligence in there that is not being leveraged, right? So, adding on personal financial planners, providing advice on where to find discounts or offers based on your purchase history, making the bank statement in and of itself so much more engaging and exciting and a tool for consumers to become more financially savvy and level up to that next level of financial sophistication and start getting into credit products. I don't know, there's a lot of user experience and AI applications there that not so much the debit card, but the deposit access could really open up, which, a central bank rail is not built. It's a commodity. It's a rail to access. It doesn't have yet these value-added services built around that. So that's a potential, when I think about debit cards, a potential area of opportunity.
Amazing. This central bank conversation, I'll put a pin in it just for a few moments because I want to return to it. But before we go there, Sulivan, where do you see the impact of RTPs on credit cards? Is it also a threat?
Yeah, specifically for credit cards, I believe that today still not, but I'm pretty sure that it will be in the future when we have credit solutions tied to the bank accounts instead of tied to the card, instead of tied to the PIX. More, I think it's better to say than tied to the bank account. Of course, that then we will have several questions about purchase guarantees, the benefits that card networks offers. But I believe that this solution, when mature, will impact credit cards volume for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I just paused there thinking what you were saying, Sulivan, because there's this hypothesis that real-time payments really can't touch credit, but that's already not true because of the aggressive discounts that merchants are giving away for Pix, which can, on a high ticket transaction, can really be something very meaningful. We also see, schemes to create credit or installment payments via Pix, with Pix Parcelado, Pix Garantido, and this is of course an opportunity in other countries. So what this is working to do is pushing card networks and issuers to imagine the next generation of the card business, which probably will not even be called the card business. Cards comes from your physical card, but increasingly, physical cards are expensive. They build in a lot of cost, right? The actual cost of the card, the cost of issuing and delivering the card, the cost of reissuing the card when it's expired, if it's lost or stolen. And so this continual progression toward digital credentials, all of the same technology, you don't need a physical card, but you have that credential living in an app somewhere. That going in that direction, combined with all of these other services that we've talked about, I really see card networks continuing to step into this role that they already play of brokering all of the services you need to create fully interoperable, instantaneous, and secure payments that work for any use case. And you need a lot of technology and expertise to make that happen. So that's what I imagine this next generation card business to be. I don't know if card will be the word we use anymore in the next 5 years. But I think that this RTP trend is really accelerating and challenging the networks to think in this way.
That's amazing. And that is just resonating to me personally as a person. I dislike carrying a wallet around. I like everything just on my phone, everything easy access. I have 1 or 2 cards with a phone case specifically meant to hold just 1 or 2 cards. So that's an interesting situation, and just going a little bit deeper in that. So cards are being removed from their physical form and transitioning to, in the article, you say they're transitioning to this app-based wallet situation. How are wallets playing this role in the next gen business?
Yeah, once you get away from a physical credential, you have a digital credential, but that has to live somewhere and travel with you. And so where does that live? In a mobile app on your phone, in a wearable, eventually with your own biometric data completely in the cloud, just pay by being you, using your face. You can get increasingly far removed from the reality we're in today, but wallets or digital banks or other players that essentially store these credentials. Basically, it's that as you need the next generation card business, you need the next generation issuer where that credential sits. So it's also a call to action and innovation for issuers of all kinds.
Awesome. Okay, well, now let's move on to the ugly. And again, so as I mentioned earlier, we're defining ugly as the worst case scenario, markets crashing, blood spouting situation here.
Dramatic flair.
So Lindsay, in your article, you take this dystopian view, very reminiscent of the current TikTok trend of Hunger Games and dystopia. You discuss the dangers of this one central bank operating the payment rails. Specifically, you say this quote, "While a new payment paradigm built on low-cost, interoperable, instant payment rails is exciting, it's also worrisome, since much of the infrastructure is being built by central banks. This gives them a lot of power to control the flow of money in an economy and gives them the ability to discriminate against competitors they don't like." And I love this part. "To be a bit dramatic, regulators in Brazil are single-handedly deteriorating the economics within the payment system." Can you tell us more about what you're thinking here? And specifically, what can the private sector offer that the public sector cannot?
Yes, terrific. So, I played with that a little bit just to bring some drama to the conversation, but really the point is that we've never really been in a situation in which a government, a regulator is operating a payment system. And that has a lot of potential. You know, PIX is it's brand new. And so far it has brought completely positive impacts to the environment. But there are maybe some unintended consequences that could happen that we should be vigilant about, right? Just first of all, PIX is subsidized, it's state subsidized. Just like, you know, I go to the example of farm subsidies in the US, right, where corn is deeply subsidized, which makes it difficult for competitors for other countries to import their corn. Any subsidy makes it difficult for competitors to compete on an even playing field. Now, some people say, well, it's about time. Card networks have been charging us a really high fee for decades, so they're happy to see this new competition being brought in from the government. Others say, well, this is unfair competition and you're crowding out private investment. You're crowding out the private sector. And when you remove economics or profit from an economic system, you remove the incentive to innovate. And so that brings up the question, will the central bank continue innovating? Will they continue to evolve PIX as the market may demand it? Or will they invest sufficient in the infrastructure needed to even just sustain the platform? Now, there's no indication to say they won't. It's just questions that we need to think of, that we need to be thinking about. And that's, you know, when you ask what does the private sector offer that the public sector doesn't, it's essentially, you know, profit generation fuels the next evolution of innovation. And so if you remove that, what happens to, you know, new demands being met? It could actually have the opposite effect and result in market consolidation, market concentration. Food for thought, you know, the best thing I would say to avoid a potential scenario is making sure that there are alternative options available, right? Look for the areas where PIX or our other RTPs are operationally deficient and look to fulfill that opportunity because no one solution solves for all use cases. And so there's still a lot of research and analysis to be done to figure out what are those other use cases and opportunities for competing payment methods and payment rails to really maintain or increase their market share.
It's a very great analysis and important one to bring up. Sulivan, turning the attention to you, do you agree with this view? What do you think the long-term impact will be in Brazil of the changes that we're seeing?
Yeah, I definitely understand Lindsay's points, but I do not agree. I think that so far central bank moves have been essential to boost interoperability and have, in a way, forced the traditional players to modernize. Of course, there was already a movement towards modernization, but for sure that PIX was key for this to accelerate. Even more, I guess, with the wave of new banks with the pandemic. I think that the timing of PIX was perfect. And for me, these developments of the central bank encourage the innovation itself and the entry of new players in the market. And I believe that something similar will happen with the next innovations, the next use cases for the other technologies that we mentioned before. I'm just not sure yet how, but I'm pretty sure that they will happen.
Great. And so, Sulivan, can you speak about like these technical challenges that PIX or RTPs may experience in their expansion?
Yes, sure. I think one of the main challenges it is implementing PIX in large stores, physical stores that uses complex ERP systems, for example. And the card industry has evolved a lot for decades to we get what we have today, where you can see one operator that receives, issues the invoice, update the product inventory. It's all in the same system, and PIX does not yet have this type of integration by by its nature, but this is being developed by third parties and payment processors. So I believe that this is the main challenge right now, and this is to enhance PICs for these large systems used in the physical world, because from my understanding, the digital world is already being addressed. And also when we have credit solutions, when they are developed, for sure that the purchase guarantees, as I mentioned it before, this will be a big problem because the central bank already said that they will not handle purchase guarantees. So this will depend on the players offering. And I believe that this will be a key challenge to overcome. And also the traditional chargebacks, understanding what will be the correct process to do this reverse payment via PICs. I believe that this is not yet clear. So basically, I see these challenges as the main ones.
And of course, those challenges open up new opportunity, right? I can envision companies offering, chargeback isn't really the correct word in a non-card environment, but chargeback insurance or protection, or a service that arbitrates between customer and merchant in the case of a dispute, since the central bank has said we're not going to take on that role. There's still a lot to be built around PICs to ensure that this gets taken care of. But what's interesting is that so far, Sulivan, correct me if I'm wrong, but this hasn't been a big source of complaint. Issues with refunds, issues with reversals, issues with chargebacks. In our discussions with merchants, this doesn't seem to be a huge problem yet.
No, we have seen some problems with fraud, with theft using PICs because it is real time. So someone can empty your account, but not in a purchase, because you need to yourself do that purchase, and you cannot say it was someone else using my bank account, because you have all the layers of protection of authentication that are much more, from my understanding, are much more strict than the using a credit card number and a code.
Fascinating stuff, guys. Thank you both so much. So let's wrap it up here. And so Lindsay, Sulivan, what is the final verdict? Will 2023 be good, bad, or ugly? Where would you place this needle?
I think I would have to go with our attendees, our respondents, most of which that said okay. And I would, my final verdict is a cautious good, not great, but good. I think a lot of companies are taking this year to invest, to adjust to this environment that they're experiencing and choose their path. There's, again, as we said, so many options. A lot of firms are in this strategic mindset. How are we going to move? And I believe perhaps next year we're going to see maybe some of those decisions start to have fruition and see really terrific results from there. So I would say okay/good this year, turning into great next year.
Sulivan.
Yeah, personally speaking, as a Brazilian, I'm very happy to see Brazil take important steps in improving its financial system. So from payments perspective, I think it has everything to be a good year. Of course, that we have challenging environment related to economics and political situations, but I think overall it has everything to be a good year.
Awesome. Well, before we go to the Q&A section, which you can still drop your questions using that icon below, I'd like to invite everybody to our amazing PCMI coffee chats, which is the most interactive expert network that provides the space to get new information, connect with others, and share meaningful insights on the payments industry's hottest and most essential topics. You can go ahead and scan the QR code here to join this awesome community full of passionate individuals. We meet twice a month and have a star-studded guest speakers list. So now that you're in the know, let's move on to this Q&A. Lindsay, Sulivan, let's start here with some questions that we see in the chat. Starting with you, Sulivan. So we know cards have the advantage of cross-border. What is the update on cross-border PIX transactions?
Okay, so it is not clear yet. There are conversations of the central bank with other countries. At the beginning of this year, it was disclosed that Uruguay, Colombia, Ecuador, and Chile were talking with the Central Bank of Brazil, so they can develop something like a PIX system within their countries. So this would be I see this as a first step to developing a cross-border PIX system, because all the countries need to have something similar regarding technology. So I believe that this is a first step, but what's happening right now is more exporting the payment infrastructure and the know-how of developing this system inside a country than the cross-border. I believe that this will be a topic in the future, but so far, mostly exporting the system itself.
Very cool. So now turning my attention to you, Lindsay, and taking this question from the chat, and going back to this fascinating quote that we presented. So what is the risk to the consumers that central bank control regulations and payments?
Good question. So, and I want to clarify here, right? The question says the risk of consumers of the risk to consumers of the central bank regulating the payment system. Now, the payment, of course, the central bank and other regulators in every country already regulate the payment system, right? They create the rules about how the payment system has to operate. You know, what security measures do you have to have in place? What levels of compliance do you have to have with international norms, et cetera? What I'm talking about is the risk of the central bank operating the payment system. In the case of Brazil, they built and operate this system. Now, the risks to the consumer at this point are highly speculative, okay? No one is saying that this is going to happen, but if you stop to think what could happen, since this has never happened before, some of those things that could happen include more vigilance on your spending, which would most likely result in the regulators being better able to assess your tax burden and collect taxes. Now, some people might say, well, that's good. I mean, that's what you should have. You should pay your due tax burden. Other consumers might say, I don't want the central bank knowing where I spend my money. I want to continue to have that privacy. Another even further step is attaching conditionality to social benefits payouts, right? Okay, you receive a subsidy from the government. Now, how are you spending that money? Are you doing things that are productive, or you're spending your money in ways that we don't support, including to certain corporations, or if you're sending money abroad, or you're buying goods that we don't think are approved? So you could open the window for central bank regulators having say in how you make payments and how you spend your money, and then using that as a condition for you to participate more widely in different areas of society. Those are just two examples. Again, that's pretty forward thinking, and again, that's pretty negative. But it's just good to be aware of what is the potential end game for regulators, right? There's a big discussion around central bank digital currencies. The speech is that central banks and regulators want to promote financial inclusion. They also want to promote digitization, fiscalization, tax collection, and more transparency, more oversight into how people and businesses are spending money. So that can be good and bad depending on who you are, what your values are. But it's just simply a side of the conversation that doesn't get told very often.
I think it's really cool that we're putting a spotlight on this, exactly what you said, part of the conversation that doesn't get a lot of airtime or thought, because obviously there's a lot of benefits here. Now, moving towards fraud, with all of, so the question here is that all this progress being made with greater convenience to the consumer, do you think that regular people understand the risks of payment fraud sufficiently to be careful when making a payment and protect their sensitive information?
Definitely not. I don't think most consumers understand anything about fraud, except when it happens to them, they understand that they don't like it. That's really the only thing that, you know, they need to understand, arguably. And, you know, even when you do surveys to young, like Gen Z or young people who say, how important is fraud to you? Oh, not that important. I don't care about fraud. That's only because they haven't experienced it yet. And the second they experience it, it comes to the very top of their priority list. And so, you know, I personally, this is a personal view. I don't think it's really the consumer's responsibility to educate themselves on the in and outs of fraud. Now, every consumer is responsible for their own finances, but if you're offering a service to someone, you have to be able to secure that transaction. And the fact that that doesn't happen is precisely why a lot of consumers opt out of digital payments altogether, because they don't trust, they don't want to turn that power over to that provider. They don't want to put their money in their hands. And in the US, you know, most of us, when we've had a fraud dispute, it's been taken care of pretty quickly and pretty efficiently. That's not necessarily the case in every Latin American country, especially with a payment method other than a credit card, where you do have a certain level of protection. So I'm rambling now, but customers have no idea about fraud risk. And it's pretty much a yes or no decision for them. Yes, I trust this. No, I don't. There's really not much that goes into that thinking other than a gut feeling. So there's a lot that needs to be done to secure the transaction and then communicate about that security.
Awesome. So I'll move on here to our last question since we're running out of time, but can you guys speak about these trends in Mexico and Colombia? So what's the future of SPAY? What's the future of PCMI? And what's, yeah, since we, after our focus on PIX, what's going on elsewhere?
Yeah, so great question. And I know we talked a lot about Brazil, but the Brazilian experience goes not only to understand Brazil, but also to understand what is and could happen in the rest of Latin America, because the rest of the region is really looking at Brazil as this amazing success case. And there's a lot of demand. There's a kind of a race among other central banks in the region to replicate Brazil and experience the same level of success in other countries. So Colombia, Peru, kind of being those at the top of that list. In other markets, there's a lot less organization and intention around that, and they're still very fragmented. You've got independent digital wallets, cash payment methods, individual bank aggregators like PCMI making bank transfers a reality. So it's very fragmented in other countries, and still a long way off from being anywhere near PIX. And that's where card networks and fintechs have the opportunity to help replicate and provide some of the use cases and benefits PIX is providing, but just using a different model. Now, Andreas, you mentioned PCMI and SPAY. These are in Colombia and Mexico. These are bank account rails that are, even though we didn't have a huge market launch like we did with PIX, these are two examples of bank account transfers that are really starting to capture an interesting share of personal consumption expenditure. Meaning people like paying with their bank account. Many people have a bank account, much more than a credit card, and they feel it to be secure and successful and efficient, even though the user experience may not be so amazing as other maybe mobile-based or fintech-based experiences. But the simplicity and security of it is attracting demand for these payment methods. So each country deserves its own study. But my concluding thoughts there is still a lot of fragmentation, no clear winner or who will be a winner, and a lot of opportunity to replicate the use cases and benefits of Pix using a similar or a completely different model and set of players.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that sums it up. I'd like to thank you both for a wonderful session and thank the audience for joining for today's conversation.